Hottie, I've got big news about Floyd's of Leadville. Actually, I should say you and I have big news about Floyd's, but we're saving that for next episode.
All right, so what's your big news?
Well, you know how I've gone on and on and on and on and on about Floyd's recovery mix and that it's my favorite Floyd's product? Well, I have a new favorite.
I think I know what you're talking about. It's Floyd's new Cola Full Spectrum CBD gems.
Yeah, exactly. You got it in one guess. For one thing, they're just so great tasting. For another thing, they hit the sweet spot for the amount of CBD I find to be just about right. That is, 225 milligram gems is just perfect for me. And I am a huge fan of the fact that they are full spectrum. I know isolate is great for folks who need it, but I personally prefer the full spectrum CBD.
And the cola actually tastes like cola. That's what I like about them. And they're gluten-free, which matters to a lot of our listeners. Of course, our listeners can get a great deal on Floyd's of Leadville Cola Full Spectrum CBD gems and all other products to help you relax and recover. Just head to floydsofleadville.com. Use the code FATTY at checkout for a 15% discount.
And as always, thanks to Floyd's of Leadville for being the title sponsor of this show.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race presented by Floyd's of Leadville, Season 4, Episode 24 now of the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I'm Michael Hottie, Hottie to most.
And I am Fatty, and in this episode, it's one part of a two-parter because the conversation we had with our guest really deserves the time we're going to give it. First, though, Hottie, I've got a little story I want to share with you.
Well, that's perfect because this season is all about stories, so I will allow it.
You will allow it. Thank you, Judge. Trust me, Hottie, it is relevant. And like a lot of the episodes this season, it goes back to the 12 hours of Mesa Verde race. About 3/4 of the way through my first lap, I found myself behind a woman in a Leadville kit. I didn't know who it was, so I just said, "Hey there, Leadville." Just me letting making my presence known. She asked if I wanted to get by, and to be honest, I did not. I had been pushing hard, and I did not have a lot left in me. I did not want to pass, and she was going fast, and I was worried that I would just hold her up when she had just let me by.
Sometimes it's everything you can do just to hold someone's wheel. Getting by is sometimes just not the plan, not the good idea.
Yeah. It was not my plan, but she edged over anyway. So I did my best to deserve it, just really ramped it up. And, that was it for that lap. But it was not the last time I saw this woman in a Leadville kit. She and I wound up standing together before our next turn. And so we started talking. And the next turn is apparently we were racing. Our teams were going very close to the same speed. We weren't competing against each other because that was a 2-woman team. And of course, I was on a co-ed team with my wife, Lisa. And that person I was standing with and talking to, her name is Tamira Jenlink. She was fast. She was focused. She was nice. She was very skilled on the bike. Just a really courteous, interesting person. Great talking to between laps.
So you learned a lot about this person, but did you have any idea at that moment that in just a couple of months, Tamira would be the new race director for the Leadville 100?
I did not. I wonder if she knew that. All I knew was she was just a fast Leadville local with a lot of great stories to tell, and she was also a great listener.
And now she is our guest for both this and next episode. Before we dive into that in-depth conversation, though, I think it's worth telling our listeners how our new kit is shaping up.
It definitely is, Hottie. So here's the story so far. You and I put together a few ideas, some palettes we like, patterns, our logo, and an overarching need, let's call it a demand, that we want our Season 5 kit to stand out. We then had a meeting with DNA's designers, and then we stood back and let them get to work.
A few days later, DNA had given us an online lookbook with 8 great-looking designs. Really, most of these were essentially ready-to-go kits and could have been used as our Season 5 kits as is.
Yeah, and maybe we should have. I don't know. That would have been the lazy way out, but you and I are not like that. We needed to have more input. So you and I talked a little bit. We showed the designs to our wives, to our friends, and then we sent our feedback to the DNA design team.
And then in just 2 business days, DNA had turned around a whole new batch of designs, taking our feedback into account. 8 very refined designs.
Yeah, and that's kind of where we are now. Basically 1 revision, I would say, away from final. And I've got my 3 favorites picked, Hottie. I don't know. I don't know if you've picked your favorites yet. I'll be interested to see what you think, but I'm going to be very interested to see if you vote for the same ones that I like.
Now, that reveal will be a little later. But after all that's done, we'll see what our listeners think. In fact, I wouldn't be too surprised if we're ready to have a listener vote in our next episode.
Yeah, I am very interested to see how our listeners like it. The great thing is, the white glove treatment that you and I have been getting on this kit is just, frankly, how DNA works. Anyone can get a custom kit with a great looking set of designs that they pick from. That's just what DNA does.
And our listeners can get started on their 2022 Leadville kit design by going to dnacycling.cc and clicking the custom apparel menu. Be sure to let them know the Leadville podcast sent you. Our guest this episode is the new Leadville Race Series race director, Tamira Jenlink. As you mentioned, Fatty, there's a lot of substance in this conversation, so we wanted to air it in its entirety.
Yeah, her job training started during the peak of the race season. It was like, welcome to the team, Tamira. Now, can you help us with a stage race, a 10K, and a couple 100-mile races? And oh yeah, we're going to be doing some different things this year, like we're doing wave starts for the first time ever, and we're making some very significant course changes as well. Mm-hmm. So have fun.
Yeah, have fun there. Even though Tamira's job covers a lot of races, we in this interview, or interviews, I should say, mostly focus on the Mountain Bike 100. And this year's edition had some highs and lows, most notably the fatal crash on course. And we talked to Tamira about that. There were new cross-traffic issues as well on course. We also get into how the race is communicating with the racers and how Tamira hopes to build a more informed field as it heads to the start line. This is a 2-parter, so yes, we do talk to her about Ken and Mara Lee, Leadboat, and diversity. That will be in part 2. For now, let's get to know your new race director, Tamira Jenlink.
Person. So I would like to now turn it over to your new event manager. Let's just call her what she is. She's the race director, Tamira Jenlink, up here. Tamira.
Good morning, everybody. How are you? Are we ready to race? Are we ready for the start tomorrow?
Tamira, thanks so much for joining us for this conversation. Really have a lot of things that we want to ask you.
Well, Eldon, thanks so much for having me on your show, both of you. I'm looking forward to this, and that did make me a little nervous, I'll be honest. A lot to ask, huh?
Oh yeah, we're going to grill you. No, let's start with your history with this race, because race director is not the first thing you've done with the Leadville 100. You've raced it. Tell us what your fastest, your worst time is. And how many times have you raced Leadville?
I think I've got 4 times, and I'm pretty sure that's right. I've meant to go back and double check that a few times, but my very first time was my slowest time, like many people, and it was just a barely making it kind of a thing. I thought that one could actually take a group up Kilimanjaro and come back and ride the Leadville 100 6 weeks later. And that didn't actually pan out quite as I planned. It was quite humorous. And I'm surprised I finished, to be honest with you. And I thought it was a fantastic sort of look into what the race really is, and how cross-training is a fabulous thing, but it's not all you need. And there's a lot involved in this race. So I think that time frame, I don't remember, Eldon, it was 11, I want to say 15 or something. It was definitely like, and I got done and I thought, no way, this is so much harder than I thought it was going to be. And I think that was 2013 or 2014. I have to double check. And before that, I had been in the Silver Rush 50, and that was sort of my first race with Lifetime. And my intro, I had some friends in New Mexico. I'm not a racer by nature. who had said to me in like 2007, 2006, hey, you should come race with us. And that's really how I got introduced. And then those same people said, you should check out this race. So all of those things being said, when I came into it, I didn't have a lot of background on what I was actually getting myself into. And I had enough fun that I decided to come back, and I was able to take a couple hours off the next year. And I held at that time for the next 3 years, which was I had in my fourth go was 2017. And I was on course for my sub 9. And honestly, I had a really lovely accident out on the flats, which is always a fantastic reminder to me about what areas of the course you think are going to be dangerous or going to be a problem, and what areas become that. And it's something I talk about now. I've been coaching for the last few years, and it's something I talk about with my athletes, is those things that we don't expect. So I found myself out there in a good pack, doing all the things that I coach people to do, which is work together and work hard. And we were going fast, and a couple of us hit handlebars, and that was it. Like 8 of us went down, and I was pretty shooken up and found myself getting back on my bike and moving. And about 5 minutes later, I realized that my headset was cockeyed. And so I got to stop there and fix that. And by that point, I was off. I was off my beat. I was off my game, and went ahead and finished my race still strong, still felt great. It was still a 9:20 time or something like that, which wasn't horrible, but it was not, what I had expected to be. And of course, you have Powerline coming up after that. So I could go on, but those are a little bit of highlights of my time on the course, specific with that course.
Well, we will have to schedule another episode with you where we just get the story of your day, because you're not just, just in air quotes here, a race director. You're definitely someone who has a lot of stories to tell. But I want to get to your new job. If I were looking at your LinkedIn profile and saw that you had taken a new job, I would not have thought to myself, I bet she's going to be a race director for one of the largest mountain bike races in the world. I would have thought, I bet she's going to be a pro team's doctor or a pro team's psychologist, or perhaps even the race director. So tell us, how is it that you are now the race director for the Leadville 100?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's many layers to that. And a couple of years ago, the position was available, and I was actually intrigued and interested. And it wasn't the right time in my world to jump into that. I've been kind of trying to finish up my doctorate in neuropsychology, neuropsychophysiology for the last few years, and have been very focused on the nervous system, on training, working with athletes, working with kind of stress levels in the body. And I think my athleticism and my involvement in kind of being in the races and out there with people and connected, and kind of having this platform, this background of how do we most successfully achieve emotional wellness, and what are the ways that we help people do those things. And I very naturally, organically came to this belief, and have done a lot of work around this, around movement, and what movement has to do with balance in our human self, in our whole being, and how we show up in the world. And as I kind of came to this place, I was kind of getting to the place of, I enjoy racing just to be out there with the human component, with my friends and the people that are on course. And I watched how that piece is also dynamic in our emotional wellness. How we get to be connected with humans, how we get to be together, and then we're moving, and then we're outside. And those three pieces are a huge platform that I've worked from for the last 10 to 15 years with all the clients I've worked with and all of the humans I've worked with, myself included. And so it was this natural, I think, evolution in a way. Simultaneously, I will tell you, I had 10 years of being a firefighter, which is an interesting addition to, I think, where I have always been drawn to service. I've always been drawn to how I engage with my community. And these pieces sort of intersect beautifully in the sense of I've spent a lot of time in event management, if you will, in a very different setting, working with my community, been a part of some pretty major disaster service and response. And in that space, becoming community liaison in some of those roles. And so all of these things sort of converged. And I was just in this, I had 2 years, Eldon, where I needed to reset everything. To be honest, I had one of those perfect midlife sort of like, I've been on this path, and what am I most drawn to? What am I most invited to? What really nourishes me? What excites me? What brings me alive? And it has always been involved with seeing people move outside. I've been in that world for 25 years plus in just different facets. And when this came around and I got to talking with Mike Melly during the camp, I was guiding for our mountain bike camp here, and the job had come up again, and it sort of crossed my plate, and I'm like, wow, I'm at the right moment. This is the moment in my life where I see this position as far more than just directing races and just logistics. I see it a lot about my community and my backyard. I see it about being a part of something much larger than myself, which was extremely inviting and exciting to me. How could I step into this place and bring all of my skills together? And here I am. And that's a very long-winded answer to your question of how I arrived at this place. And it fit on both sides. You know, Lifetime saw those pieces and felt like they fit as well. And so here we are.
I know you got to, be there for much of the summer events in Leadville. Of course, this is the mountain bike show. We focus on the mountain bike. So we're going to ask you questions specific about what you saw from the LT100 2021 edition and what were your key learnings on just the mountain bike race itself as you kind of step away from it now and take a look in the rearview mirror at the Race Across the Sky, the mountain bike edition?
I think one piece, it's a great question that I could probably spend days and years on, but I think one piece is it's very fast. You get that when you're an athlete, but as the person watching, things are moving quickly. And being ready with all the different layers of how to address things from one end of the course to the other, because while you have some folks up on Columbine, you still have people back just coming across, our awesome back of the pack who is out there with true grit and determination. And we are as much focused on as anything are still over here midway through that course. And so there's so much spread out. And I think that's one of my big pieces that I'm going to spend time with this winter is, and we are already looking at ways, and we've made changes this year to try to address how we make this experience a fantastic and continue like it has been for years as Ken and Mara Lee have put it out there and continuing to build on that platform they've created. And how I think the other piece about how fast it is, and then right alongside of that is it's a big race. There's a lot of people. So you're really trying to meet the athlete experience of many different caliber of humans and many different levels of desire and levels of reasons, layers of reasons to be out on that course. And I'm interested in how we meet all of those. So I think those are a couple of the areas of how we continue to develop that piece and really play to that experience and build on that piece. So that's really garnered my attention as it went off. And I really felt that when we came into the run. Even though it's longer, it's slower. So that piece stood out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the things you folks might be looking at, and again, we talked to racers afterwards in town and at the award ceremony, and there were no blanket complaints about the change in the format and the change in the race. The only thing I heard a couple times was, the cross traffic has been extended a little bit more because of the speed of the race, because of the wave starts. Now there's some increased cross traffic at pinch points that the front of the field or even a little further back than that wasn't seeing in years past. Is that what you're talking about? Some of the areas you want to address as you folks go into the winter here? Yes,
I think that's one of the areas, as well as, very much so. And in addition, we started with a wave start this year, which was our first year to implement the wave start. And most of what I'm hearing, and I'm curious what you all have heard as well, has been pretty positive on the wave start itself, but we saw some learning for ourselves around that as well. Okay, we did the wave start, but then how did that impact cutoffs? How did that impact the experience later on in the race as you're talking about those pinch points and that overlap in traffic? a lot of what came back was that staggered start was really helpful in places like St. Kevin's. So that was a real benefit of not quite having the same choke points that we've had previously. However, on the backside, one of the changes we made is not having inbound going up the single track, but going past that. And that seemed to work well, but we still have learning. We still have learning around how do we really make those cutoffs work in a way that still meets whoever's at the back in that white corral all the way to the front. And how do we really create equity in all of that? So that's a big, strong question. It's something that I will address directly with our athletes here shortly via a direct letter myself to them, as it's something that's on my mind. So there's some learning pieces in there. Absolutely.
More with Tamira in a minute. In case you didn't hear, though, the backstory on Tamira, the previous race director left the Leadville race series going straight into the heart of the schedule. So the fact that the LRS was able to hold things together was pretty amazing.
And race day proved to be tough emotionally for everyone. And let's say it for sure, the race director especially. And we will get into that next. First, though, I think one thing everyone can say about the 2021 Leadville Trail 100 is it was a hot day. The daytime high downtown was like 77, but it felt like 87, 95 on course. I know for me, this day turned into just ongoing efforts to avoid dreaded cramps. I was, for the most part, successful, in part because of a good hydration strategy with an assist from the feet.
Yeah, a couple things you were insistent upon at your Twin Lakes stops were a packet of GU Roctane electrolyte capsules. Those are electrolyte supplements that you took both outbound and inbound, washed down with a chug of water.
Yeah, I have tried a lot of different things to keep cramps at bay. Hot shots, pickle juice, and now GU Roctane electrolyte capsules. I think those are one of my favorite things. It's a never-ending battle for a lot of us, and it is an area where the feed can definitely help. First, you got to find what works, and the feed has everything that I've mentioned here. Second, put whatever works on auto refill. Make sure your account has your cramp nutrition solution in your favorites. That is what I do.
The feed is the best place to get the nutrition you're going to train and race with easily, automatically, and at a great price. Go to thefeed.com/Leadville to sign up for a 15% discount on all your orders.
One other thing we had in the feed zone was a pair of Envy wheels. Those were mine. I want to make sure nobody else took those. Even, it may sound a little bit exorbitant, but the fact is, I'm super happy that even my spares are Envies.
Yeah, luckily the spares sat there the whole day. No one on Team Fatty needed them. But man,
yeah,
I think you just made the whole audience jealous. I mean, spare Envies, Fatty.
I know. And the fact is, now that I have been on Envies, it is hard for me to roll with anything else or even consider anything else. At Twin Lakes Alternate were my M525 wheels. I'm simply not going to compromise on the most important part of my race gear during the most important race of the year.
And talk about peace of mind, that if you knew during the race that if anything did go wrong, like a flat, your replacement was going to not cost you a thing. We're not telling everyone here you have to be like Fatty and have a stock of Envy wheels spread all over course, but at least try to get them on your race bike. You won't be disappointed. Check out Envy's bar stems wheels post over at Envy, that's ENVE.com.
The new Leadville race director, Tamira Jenlink, is with us. The 2021 edition left Tamira with a lot to think about, most notably rider safety, as this year we had one of only 2 fatalities that have ever happened during this race. Well, I love that you are thinking about actually talking to the racers themselves and asking them, the questions, what worked for you, what didn't. The waves was obviously one of the big changes. So what surprised you about the day this year on race day? You've raced this race. You've helped with the race before. You had even managed the stage race. What surprised you about the 2021 Leadville 100?
I think surprise is a hard word, and there was not necessarily one thing that I felt like grabbed me. There was everything compiled together. And this was a tough year. We lost somebody in our family, and that was very hard. We had a lot more accidents on course this year than we've had for some years. And while those were not surprising necessarily, they're hard. They're very, very hard. And our teams, our search and rescue local team did amazing. Our rapid response medical team did amazing. And at the same time, I'm not sure that there's one thing that I pull out that qualifies as surprise as much as that compilation, but those specific pieces were just hard. And to be able to show up with everybody and recognize that there was a lot of heart and a lot of soul that played into it, but it was hard. There was some real hard moments.
Yeah, and we don't expect you to have any answers about the fatality on course, but when and if you do, and if it's now, that's fine. If you have something you want to tell the race community about what happened, you can do that now if you like. If you want to pass, that's fine too. We get that, because Fatty and I have also tried to give space to the family there in what must be, a tragic time for that person. Yeah,
there's pieces that are their story to tell. And we will continue to honor that and respect that and really hold the container around that piece. What I can say is we had a number of amazing humans show up in some very tough moments and be present and stay. And it speaks highly of who those people, of who we are, who this group is, who shows up at this race. The story is for the family when they're ready to tell it.
Yeah, fair enough on that. I do wonder, as someone just on the course, noticed more people down this year than I've seen in other years. And I don't know why. I really don't. I didn't understand. There was no single accident that necessarily made me think, well, that was a weird place to have a crash. But it did seem like there was more of those instances. And that's what you just described. Is there a working theory for what was going on? Or is it just that we were all so anxious to get on the course that we perhaps overcorrected and went harder, that we all pushed our envelope, and statistically, more people are going to get hurt when that happens?
I think it's a fantastic question, and it's one that we have been looking at closely. We will continue to talk. We have another debrief in October. I've chatted a bit with Search and Rescue, with our local team, medical team, and just looking closely at what are the different pieces. And honestly, Eldon, I don't think it's one thing. I think it's a compilation of pieces. We did have very significant rain the month prior to the 100. And while it was very dry, what happened during that rain is it did actually change some parts of the course a bit and make them a little more eroded. So there's that factor. There's the factor of what happens when that's wet versus when it dries out, and it was dry. There's the factor of we've just been through a pandemic. We are so, we didn't just train for a year, we trained for 2 years. We trained and trained and trained, and there's so much invested. And I don't think we can put any qualifier on how that shows up and how we show up ready to give it everything we've got.
Yeah, I think we were all straining at the bit a little bit is kind of how it felt to me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can feel the energy. Like it was there's a lot of excitement. There's some anxiety in there or stress or whatever of just, I'm ready, let's go.
Yeah.
And all of those pieces come together and they show up. And it's funny, I had a conversation and we were able to name that there's probably only one other year with that level of accidents or crashes. And a number of them were not super severe, but there were a number of them. There were some very significant ones, and then there were a number of just fast, people moving fast. And I think they heard the dig deep. Give it your grit, give it your determination and go. And they had sunk into that themselves. But I also think there's some other pieces in there of just how the terrain is impacted, how the energy is, and it's, again, we'd have to do a full-on research study to get that dialed in, right?
Well, I love that you're at least thinking about the questions. I mean, some of these, maybe there will be answers, and some of them, maybe we'll never have answers. But I'm very enthused to hear that you have the same questions that we do and are thinking about how to start making a difference with them.
100%.
One of the things that you mentioned when you were talking up on stage before the race, it didn't surprise me. I had only met you one time in person before, but it was at the 12 Hours of Mesa Verde. You and I were just coincidentally waiting for our teammates to come in and hand us batons. And since we were racing at about the same pace, you and I wound up standing together, I think 2 or 3 times. And it was fun to meet you then. And I noticed then as well that there is an intensity to you, but also a real positivity. And that's something you emphasized on the stage before the race as well. You were really talking about encourage each other, communicate with each other, be positive with each other. Do you feel like that worked? Do you think that there was a difference, or was the course about the same in terms of how people were communicating, whether people were being encouraging and communicative?
I don't know the answer, Eldon. Like, that's one that I have to put back and ask them and feel from the athlete perspective. I heard a lot of people comment on that discussion, and it's something that is very potent to me, is, are we connecting with each other on the course? Very few of us, there's a handful who are out there to make money and are elite pro racers. And many of us, I think there is this opportunity that we can sometimes miss in how we connect with one another on that course, and how it can fuel us to actually be stronger and faster and more alive. And I don't know the answer to your question, but it is something that I will continue to bring in. I noticed that I mentioned it in that talk, that it felt like the pandemic maybe had left us all in a lot of different spaces, and that communication had felt different to me in that course, as well as moving forward and wanting to bring that piece back of, there's nothing like when we're taking care of each other out on the course, when we're communicating, when we're cheering each other on, when we're, able to connect. And, I think there's one of the most powerful times can be when you've got folks coming up Columbine and folks coming down Columbine, and that communication that often happens, to me at least, is a very moving experience. And wanting to see that come back, but I don't know the answer. Like, I feel like it's on the survey. What did you all see? What did you experience? What do we need to work at together? Well,
I love that you were actually working on a survey. I will say that the culture will come from you, right? That if this is something you continue to emphasize, it will make a difference over time, over multiple iterations of this race. And so if it hasn't made a difference, it will make a difference. I will say also that it made a difference for at least me this year. It served as a good reminder, and I shouted myself hoarse on the way down Columbine this year. And further credit also goes to Payson McElvin, who reminded us in an episode prior to the race, saying, that any positivity you send out there comes back double to you, which was absolutely true. But it served as a good reminder, and for sure it worked for me. And it felt to me that, that there was more positivity, perhaps because I was out there being a little more positive myself.
That's awesome to hear. And I think I'd take a minute and take that in. And I get excited by the opportunity for us to create a culture together that we all love. And if I can help bridge that feels exciting.
The Leadville course, too, it's one of the reasons we all love it so much. The format just lends itself to that type of, hey, I see you, you see me, go for it. That's the beauty of that. But it's one of the beautiful things about that place. And as long as the race, as it continues to, make little adjustments to the course, keeps that in mind. I mean, obviously, you're going to have to deal with these pinch points we talked about. That may mean separating people in points. But as long as we still get to enjoy that experience overall, I think, we're on the right course there. Also, on the communication front, Tamira, I wanted to talk about the race's communication to the racers, and what's some of your thoughts on that? I know that there still seems to be a lot of confusion over what's in the race Bible. For instance, chip time versus gun time. I mean, that still seems to be a stumbling block for some racers. They're not quite, especially for the people in white this year who were actually racing with less time. at the start. And I ran into one gentleman in particular who was just still confused about chip versus gun and when does gun matter and when does chip matter. Another communication issue that seems to be troubling to some racers is that setting up their crew areas. When can they do that? Where can they do that? What are some of your thoughts on how the race is communicating with its racers at this point?
That's another great question, Hottie, and I think it's something that we will always be able to improve on, always. For me stepping in, I can see places that I want to refine that communication much clearer. I think that gun time and chip time has historically been confusing, and I'm wondering that same question of how do we clarify this piece? One of the things I've thought about is working with Cole to even field questions live from time to time throughout the next, 8 months before we come back around and bring those questions out and kind of tease them apart, flesh them out more, and give people an opportunity to hear more and more about that and to ask some of those questions directly. So that's one piece. Like, I'm thinking both in the context of, I think you're absolutely right. I think we have some areas we can improve. And I'm also thinking about how can we do that? How can we step into those conversations and get clearer? Certainly, chip time is when everybody crosses the line. Gun time is when it goes off. And it's so confusing, particularly with this wave start. And I think there's also the human element. I've just put everything I have into training for this course. And suddenly some things change. And when things change, there's uncertainty around that, and it just adds to it. And I think those are pieces. I get very interested in how we can clarify communication and how we can spend more time and create avenues to open the door. I'm thinking about some regular emails from the director that are just coming from me and ways to address those things. So the bottom line is I see it as an issue that we can refine, and I'm thinking about how do we do that.
And I know it's not your job to manage the qualifiers, but there also seems to be a gap between the qualifiers and whoever runs them, Euphoria Productions in particular, and your racers. Now, they're going to turn to you, obviously, and say, hey, what's going on? I'm not hearing from Tahoe Trail 100. The folks up at Wilmington Whiteface have got my entry fee. I don't know what's going to happen with that race. Is it your job to step in there and bridge that gap? And can you do that for the racers? Or are you going to let those managers, the folks that are managing those qualifiers and those other events, handle that?
You don't ask easy questions, do you? It is not my job to do it for them, but I think part of what I take to heart is how do we all communicate together and build on how we get through. Like, part of what happens is how much is put on each event manager or race director's plate. And so what are the ways that we come together and build on ideas about how we communicate with those people? And not just your event managers, but oftentimes athlete services. These are the people who are holding the bulk of these 700, 800, 1,000 emails, and us finding bridges around how we get the ability to communicate more directly with everybody. So while I don't think I can answer for those people, I hope that I can play a role in building the bridges of how we come up with ideas to do it together and to facilitate that piece more.
I don't think it's possible to over-communicate to racers, especially perhaps for this race. The fact that there is a 4-season-old podcast about a one-day race in Colorado might tell you about how much folks who love this race really love hearing about this race. Hearing from the race director, I think, on an ongoing basis would do a lot for how people understand this race and for how much they love. In fact, I know of a little podcast where you could probably get a standing 5-minute column that where you could just air your thoughts. I bet we could talk to some people and get you on a show fairly often.
Do you think there's somebody who would know how to do that, Eldon?
We can look into it.
Would you? I think we need to make those places available.
Yes.
Like, that's what my heart says. My heart says, I know how much this race can matter. I know how it can feel to be out there. I know how also isolating it can feel to not understand everything. I also know our culture of we should, and I put that in air quotes that you can't see, but we should be able to figure it out. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to play a role in how we figure it out together, and all the ways that I can find to regularly show up and to field those questions and to field them directly and to be that face and to be very present. I really want to do that.
This was communication. Like, what happened to talking to each other out there? So what I'm looking for is get that back in gear. When we're coming up behind each other, one of my favorite things to do is notice each other. Like, hey, nice work, awesome. Say something as you're coming up. Let them know you're coming, particularly on these descents like Powerline and Sugarloaf.
We've got more with Tamira, enough more that we have another episode with her. Still on the table, lead vote, tensions with locals and local government, racer diversity, pros, and Tamira's vision for the race. So plenty left to get to.
Yep, looking forward to that. In our last show, we told you about how Shimano improved braking in its new road groups simply by borrowing ideas from the mountain bike side. Well, when it comes to the 12-speed chain for Dura-Ace and Ultegra, Shimano's done more than borrow. It is simply taking the XTR and XT chain and putting those in its road groups.
Seems like a smart idea. Hottie and I spoke to the heads of Shimano's road line, and they both said that the company's 12-speed mountain bike chains are as good as it gets. So what you will see on the Dura-Ace and Ultegra Di2 systems are either XTR or XT chains.
Yeah, even our friend and marginal gainer-in-chief, Silka's Josh Portner, has said that the Shimano XTR chain is the best he's come across. What you might see from Shimano down the road is a little co-branding with the XTR and XT chain packaging, add the Dura-Ace and Ultegra names, but this is still the fast and reliable mountain bike chain that so many racers have grown to trust.
I absolutely do. For a good look at the new Shimano road groups and the mountain bike chain that they will come with, go to bike.shimano.com.
Let's wrap this episode, but not this interview. There's a part 2 to our talk with Tamira Jenlink. One thing we will clarify for you in part 2 is just what Tamira is in charge of and what she is not in charge of.
Yeah, and here's what we are in charge of. Hottie's on social media. I am on Twitter at Fat Cyclist, and Hottie is on Instagram. Hottie is in charge of Instagram because I don't know how to use the camera on my phone. Of course, we're both on Facebook, Leadville 100 Mountain Bike Participants page, and if you want to have a conversation, join our Slack channel. You will find a link to it over at Leadville100podcast.com.
If you like the show, go to wherever you listen and give us a 5-star rating and write a review. By the way, in the new iOS update, Apple is adding a way to share this podcast. Any podcast, really, but this podcast is the one that matters. Just say, hey, Siri, send this to Fatty. Like I would know. I use Android, but I understand there's a Siri person on the other end who will actually respond, and Siri then will send or share the podcast to a friend, another friend with an Apple phone, and then the podcast will show up in their shared with you section of Listen Now. This is all, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I use an Android, but evidently this does work.
Oh, and you just activated phones all across the internet. Sorry, everyone. Sorry, Apple device that just shared this podcast with me everywhere. But meanwhile, everyone, please tell your racing friends about the podcast. That is actually the nicest thing you can do to help us spread the word about our independent show. To see all the ways you can find this show, here's a new, easy-to-remember domain, Leadville.fm.
Hey, Siri, good luck in your riding, racing, and recovery. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the 2022 starting line.